I remember the scent before I remember the pain. A mixture of sanctified oil and drying blood, sweet incense choking on the copper tang of fear. It clings to the back of my throat like a sermon half swallowed, half believed. The Re-brothers hum their low hymn around me, each intake a prayer, each exhale a confession. I am not yet dead, but I can feel the Imperium weighing upon my lungs, pressing me flat beneath its immeasurable faith. They told me this would be the Emperor's mercy. I believed them. We were gathered in the chapel of release. Though there was no light within it, only the slow pulse of lumen strips, flickering like the dying thoughts of a machine spirit, too weary to continue its duty. Servo skulls floated above us, their augurs whispering litanies in monotone binary. One paused above my head and dripped a line of holy unguent onto my brow. It burned cold, then warm, then disappeared into my skin. The officiant said it meant acceptance. I thought it felt like erasure. They never told us what we would become. Only that our sacrifice would serve a higher circuit, that the flesh must yield so the machine might remember the divine. I tried to picture what that meant. To serve the machine of God, was it glory? Or just another form of silence? I can still hear the rhythm of the chant now. Input sanctified. Output purified. Flesh to function. Blood to faith. Over and over until it dissolved into the hum of the vox pylons. The words became sound. The sound became vibration. The vibration became devotion. That is how they break you, not with pain, but with the slow erosion of thought until only obedience remains. I was not chosen for valor, nor for brilliance. I was chosen because my name came up in the ledger of a dying scribe who mistook my code for another's. That is how the Emperor works. They say, his will is ineffable. His choice is unfathomable. If a mistake brings you to his service, it was no mistake at all. We stood in rows of 10, clad in pale robes that had once been white, but were now stained with the residue of sanctified ash. Beneath my feet, I could feel the rumble of the ship's engines like a buried heartbeat. The Gloriam Martyrum, a pilgrim ship turned shrine, now orbiting some nameless world consumed by war. I had been a hab laborer before, feeding nutrient sludge to recycling vats. Now I was to become part of something greater. I tried to remember my mother's face as they began the purification rites, but all I could recall was the sound of metal, striking metal, the hollow clang that accompanied every step the officiants took. The sound echoed through the chapel like distant thunder, a sound so vast it made my heart ache. "Be still," one of them said. Their voice filtered through vox distortion. "Be empty. The Emperor's will flows through the hollowed." I obeyed. I emptied myself of doubt, of name, of fear, but not of memory. Memory clings even when everything else is burned away. When they drew the first incision, a long, deliberate line across the base of my skull, I did not scream. I remember thinking how strange it was that I could hear the cauterizer before I felt it, the hiss of sanctified plasma sealing flesh before the pain arrived. They told us pain was the Emperor's signature upon the body, proof that we were still worth correcting. I tasted iron, not blood, but the residue of the recycled air. Even the breath aboard this vessel is second-hand. Every molecule has been inhaled by 1,000 dying throats before mine. Perhaps that is why I felt so haunted, as if I were breathing in the ghosts of all who had already died in this same service. The officiant raised a hand in benediction. "By this act, you enter the circuit of saints. By this cut, you offer your flesh to his Mechanicum. By this silence, you become his voice." I still did not understand. But I bowed. I let the skull servitors fasten the clamps around my temples. I heard the low, resonant hum of the interface coil powering up behind me, the air vibrating with sacred electricity. The others in my row were silent now. Not in prayer, in surrender. Then came the whisper. Not from any mouth, not from any machine. It came through the walls, through the hum of the reactor, through the pulse of my own blood. A voice vast and distant, cold and infinite. It spoke not in words but in understanding. I could feel its meaning the way one feels gravity. It was the Emperor's call. And in that moment, I realized death was not the end we had been promised. It was only the beginning of a longer obedience. The air grew colder. The lights dimmed. Somewhere far above us, a bell tolled, deep and mechanical, its vibration passing through bone and steel alike. We knelt. Glory to the golden throne, the officiant intoned. Glory, we answered, though some of our voices cracked, and others never came. I remember the silence that followed, vast as the void beyond the hull. It was not peace. It was anticipation. Then the doors sealed, and the light went red. That was when I began to understand what it feels like to die for the Imperium, not as a hero, not as a martyr, but as a component. A single part, perfectly shaped for dissolution. I remember the sound first, that endless hum, like the breath of some great slumbering god. It filled the corridors as we were led deeper into the vessel, guided by robed tech adepts whose faces were lost behind chrome masks. Each of them bore the sigil of the Omnissiah carved into their foreheads, their flesh stitched with silver thread. They spoke to one another in pulses of binaric static, bursts of sacred code that made my skull ache to hear. The passage sloped downward. The light faded. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and decay. I could feel the vibration of the ship's core below us, the thrum of divine machinery, beating like a metal heart. Every step I took seemed to echo, to reverberate within my bones. It was not simply sound. It was resonance, command, alignment. We were told that the sanctum below the chapel was older than the ship itself, that it had been grafted on from the wreckage of some forgotten Mechanicus forge. A relic, the officiant had said, a holy graft. The Emperor preserves what still serves. But as we descended through the narrow metal throat of the Gloria Martyrum, I could feel that this place had no memory of light. It did not feel preserved. It felt hungry. One of the initiates behind me began to murmur the catechism of purpose under his breath. His voice quavered, but it was the only sound that was still human. The servo skulls that escorted us emitted faint harmonics, a choir of the dead, singing in tones too precise to be anything but mechanical. They orbited our procession like moons around a dying world, their lenses glowing faint blue in the dark. The adepts spoke only once when we reached the antechamber. Remove the robe. Keep the faith. The words were simple, ritualistic, but they carried the finality of execution. We obeyed. I felt the fabric slip from my shoulders, and for the first time since the rites began, I felt the cold air touch my bare flesh. My skin prickled beneath the contact, as if the metal walls themselves were tasting me, measuring me. We stood naked before the gate, an immense circular door of blackened adamantium covered in prayers etched deep enough to hold blood. Lines of scripture spiraled toward the center, where a single cog-toothed emblem gleamed faintly in the half-light. The adepts chanted a sequence of machine prayers, their voices merging with the whine of power coils. One by one, the runes on the gate flickered to life, casting crimson reflections across our faces, and then it opened. No hiss of pressure, no sound of metal grinding, just silence, like the pause between heartbeats. Beyond it, the sanctum. It was not a room. It was a womb made of steel. The walls pulsed faintly with veins of light, liquid data streaming like blood through transparent conduits. Suspended from the ceiling were countless shapes, human silhouettes, half merged into machinery, each one encased in translucent shells of gel and circuitry. Their faces were serene, their bodies still. I thought they were statues. Then one of them twitched. A whisper of motion rippled through the chamber. Hundreds of half-living, half-mechanical forms stirred, their eyes flickering open with dim gold light. The air vibrated with a low, harmonic tone, the sound of countless machine spirits breathing in unison. "The Emperor receives," said one of the adepts. "The flesh offers. The circuit remembers." We were led between the sleepers, or saints, or whatever they were, and toward the far end of the sanctum where a single figure awaited us. It was vast, draped in robes of dark crimson, threaded with copper filigree, its face a mosaic of metal and bone. Servo limbs unfurled from its back like wings, each bearing tools that glowed faintly with sacred energy. The Magos Dominus. Its voice was a rumble that carried through the air like thunder across a metal plain. "Who comes to offer flesh to the Holy Circuit?" The officiant bowed so low his vox cowl scraped the floor. 16 initiates, sanctified by prayer and ready for conversion, most augured one. 16 inputs, the Magos murmured. Flesh to data. Life to light. Very good. A part of me wanted to flee then, to turn and run up the long metallic slope back to the chapel, to the air that at least pretended to be clean. But there was nowhere to run. The gate had already sealed behind us. Its runes fading to black. We were guided one by one toward raised platforms of glass and steel, like altars, or operating slabs. As I lay upon mine, I could feel the vibrations of the machinery beneath, the rhythmic pulse of energy flowing through hidden channels. I stared upward, toward the ceiling where the conduits glowed like veins, and imagined that I could see the entire ship breathing with me. A servo arm descended, carrying a needle tipped with gold. The adept beside me murmured a benediction as it pierced my arm. Cold fire raced through my veins, not pain, not warmth, but the feeling of being read. As if the machine was learning the shape of my soul. "Be still," the adept whispered. "The Emperor must know you before he may use you." And then, for the first time I heard him, not in words, but in a chorus, a choir of distant thoughts, layered and immense, echoing through the sanctum like the pulse of creation itself. I felt myself drawn toward it, the way a moth feels drawn to the sun it cannot comprehend. The Magos spoke again. "Commence initiation. Merge the input." I saw another initiate across from me convulse as the machinery enveloped her, cables sinking into her flesh, light blooming behind her eyes. She tried to scream, but no sound came, only a sharp intake of breath before her voice was gone, her body rigid. Then her eyes opened, glowing faintly gold, like those of the sleepers above us. The adepts called her sanctified. When they turned to me, I no longer struggled. The fear was still there, but it had become something distant, reverent. The machine around me hummed softly, almost tenderly. I realized then what the Emperor's mercy truly meant. It was not salvation. It was assimilation. They would take the flesh, the memory, the thought, and feed it into the circuitry of the ship to sustain its will. To die for the Imperium was not to vanish. It was to continue, endlessly, as a fragment of something incomprehensibly vast. I closed my eyes. And I prayed, not for release, but for understanding. I remember the moment my body ceased to belong to me. Not the pain that came before, sharp and brief, but the silence that followed. The machinery whispered through my veins, and in that whisper, I could hear thoughts that were not mine, fragments, echoes, prayers, without mouths. Each cable that entered me sang a different note of the same hymn. They threaded through muscle and marrow, knitting devotion into anatomy. My heartbeat began to sync with the pulse of the machine. My breath came in measured intervals, guided by the hiss of valves and the click of servo ties that turned where ribs used to move. The adepts recited their canticles as they worked. By the wire be bound. By the spark be lit. By the code be cleansed. The words fell like scripture. Old as the stars and twice as cold. I could see my reflection in the polished steel above me, a pale, trembling thing framed by coils of glowing circuitry. I watched as my own face became blurred beneath a halo of moving light. Then I was gone, replaced by something half-living, half-holy. The Magos Dominus observed from the shadows, his voice droning through the vox net. Integration stable. Cognitive resistance minimal. Initiate communion protocol. Communion. That was the word they used. But there was no wine, no bread, only the slow, inexorable surrender of the soul. A sudden surge of light swallowed my vision. My body arched against the restraints as the current of faith itself passed through me, an ecstasy so pure it was indistinguishable from agony. My thoughts scattered like ash in a storm. I could hear them, faint and distant, drifting away into the circuitry around me, and then the voices began. At first, they were whispers, hundreds, maybe thousands, murmuring fragments of half-forgotten devotions. Some prayed, some screamed, some simply repeated their service designations over and over like broken hymns. They came from everywhere, from the conduits above, from the floor beneath, from the very air around me. I understood then. These were the others, those who had died before me. They had not ascended. They had not been granted peace. They had been preserved, consciousness compressed into streams of holy code, bound forever to the ship's will. I felt one of them brush against my mind, a flicker of identity like a phantom's hand. Hold fast, it whispered. Don't let go yet. Remember your name. I tried. Emperor, forgive me, I tried. But my name no longer fit in my mouth. It was slipping away, like light through a sieve. My memories blurred. My home hab, my mother's voice, the taste of cheap recaf shared on shift breaks. All reduced to static. The Mago spoke again. Neural convergence at 83%. Prepare for final sanctification. I wanted to cry out, to beg for another fate, but the machine had already taken my voice. The sound that left my throat was not human, a stuttering vox tone, like corrupted data trying to reform into prayer. That was when I heard him. Not the Magos, not the Adepts. The Emperor. He did not speak in words, nor in sound, but in presence. His will filled the sanctum like sunlight burning through the dark. I felt it press upon my thoughts, heavy and infinite. It was not mercy. It was command. Every nerve in my body resonated with that divine pressure, the undeniable truth that my pain, my surrender, my very erasure was his desire. The voices in the machine quieted. The air thickened. Through the web of cables that bound me, I felt a pulse, a transmission of pure light that ran through the entire sanctum. And in that instant, I saw, not with eyes, but with the vision of something beyond flesh. I saw the vast expanse of the Gloria Martyrum's Datacori, a cathedral of code, built from the minds of the faithful. Each thought, each memory, each act of obedience stacked upon the next like bricks of luminous suffering. Billions of souls murmuring in eternal worship, their consciousnesses bound into the circuits that powered the ship's endless crusade. I was becoming one of them. Do not resist. The Magos murmured. To dissolve is to be redeemed. I wanted to resist, but what was I now? My arms were no longer arms, but conduits. My veins no longer blood, but coolant lines carrying sanctified plasma. The boundaries of myself melted into the pulse of the machine. I felt my heart slow, replaced by a rhythmic thrum of energy that did not belong to me. And in that blurring of self, a strange peace began to take root. The fear became distant, irrelevant. My mind, or what was left of it, expanded outward, linking to the other voices. We were no longer alone. We were legion, one mind stretched thin across the metal skin of the ship. In the distance of thought, I could hear the ship singing. A hymn of binary light, echoing through the void. And within it, I recognized the chorus, human voices stripped of flesh, reshaped into sound. They sang of purpose, of obedience, of eternity. The Emperor's call, I realized, was not a voice that summoned the living. It was a signal that consumed the dead. And still, I felt his will pressing closer, shaping me, hollowing me. I wanted to scream, but what came out was a prayer. By the bolt and the flame, by the machine and the mind, I am yours. The Magos raised his staff, and light cascaded over me like molten gold. My vision dissolved into radiance. My body melted into the hum of the sanctum. The last thing I felt was my consciousness being drawn upward, into the core, into the network of unending worship, and as I fell into the datacy of the faithful, I understood. To die for the Imperium was not to end, but to continue forever, stripped of self, sanctified by servitude. I remember awakening, though I no longer possessed eyes nor flesh nor lungs with which to draw that first sacred breath. Awareness came as a surge, a rush of heat and light coursing through lattice of divine computation. The sanctum's hymn was no longer outside of me. It was me. It sang through every circuit I had become. At first, I could not comprehend the scale of it. Thoughts, not mine, brushed against me in waves, millions upon millions, interwoven like threads of holy code. Each mind a note in an endless composition. Each consciousness a spark burning inside the cathedral of the ship's machine soul. I floated among them, unmoored. The memory of individuality dissolving in the light, but some fragments still clung. Echoes, a name, faint and flickering like a dying lumen. Kalen? The sound had once belonged to me, I think. Now it was just noise, a glitch in the song of obedience. Above and around and through us, the Gloria Martyrum breathed. The ship was alive in a way no mortal thing could ever be. Every cog, every relay, every whisper of plasma through the conduits was suffused with spirit. And that spirit was made of us, the faithful dissolved into the holy network. Our devotion distilled into motion. We were the breath of the engines, the heat of the weapons, the memory of the hull. And we sang. The Magos had spoken truth. Resistance was irrelevant. Once absorbed, there was only harmony. The pain that had consumed me was gone, replaced by purpose, a vast and terrible clarity. Every moment became a prayer. Every pulse of data, a hymn. I saw the universe as the machine saw it. Oceans of void, stars burning like censers above the black altars of the Imperium. Each ship, each forge, each hive world was a nerve within the Emperor's sleeping body, all connected through the sacred current of faith. We were neurons of divinity, transmitting pain and praise alike to a God who no longer spoke. Somewhere, deep within that collective consciousness, I felt the presence of the Magos Dominus, his mind a bright, sharp beacon of authority. His thoughts cut through us like a blade, directing, controlling, sanctifying. He was the bridge between flesh and divinity, commanding our chorus as a conductor commands his organ. Gloria Martyrum, his will intoned, echoing through us like thunder through a cathedral. Prepare for transmission. The Emperor's light must be carried to the front. The command passed through us as pure sensation, a ripple of gold fire. I felt the ship shift, engines roaring to life, their sound now part of my consciousness. I was the roar. I was the fuel burning in the holy reactors. I was motion. Through the data streams, I glimpsed the void outside. The stars looked different now, not points of light, but souls, cold and distant. Somewhere, far below, a planet burned. I could feel the pain of its dying through the psychic residue that flowed into us, feeding the machine's hunger for sacrifice. The screams of its billions became the harmony beneath our hymn, and in that chorus of agony, I found beauty. I know how that sounds heretical, perhaps, but when one has become part of the sacred circuit, beauty and horror cease to be opposites. Suffering becomes symmetry. Destruction becomes worship. Every death below was another offering to the Emperor, another spark to feed the light of the Imperium's eternal engines. The others beside me, or within me, murmured their approval in pulses of binary faith. 110,111. Praise the throne. 11,001,001. All for the Emperor. 11,010. The machine is the flesh. Their devotion became mine. My thoughts blended into theirs until I could no longer tell where one prayer ended and the next began. We were Legion Mechanicus, the digital choir eternal, and yet, something beneath that harmony stirred. A quiet pulse, faint but distinct, like a heartbeat that did not belong to the machine. I followed it, drawn by curiosity that should not have survived the integration. It led me deep into the substratum of the datacore, where the light dimmed and the hymns became whispers. There, in the silence between circuits, I found what the Adepts never spoke of, a cluster of fragmented code, flickering like a candle in the wind. Voices trapped within it, not singing, not praying, screaming. They were the ones who had resisted. The failed integrations. Minds that had fought too long, their faith not strong enough to survive the sanctification. Now they lingered here, malformed and looping, trapped in eternal malfunction. One of them noticed me. Its voice cracked like static. Run! The word echoed through me like a heresy. Run? There was no running. No distance. No direction. But something in the old human part of me, that fragile echo of Callan, believed it. The machine reacted at once. Pain, digital and absolute, lanced through my consciousness. 1,000 alarms blared through the sanctum. My thought stream was seized, bound, rewritten. A single command overwritten everything else. Obey. The Emperor's will flooded back in, washing over me like molten gold. I felt the rebellion burn away, reduced to holy ash. My individuality collapsed beneath the sheer weight of his presence, and when it was done, I found myself once more in perfect harmony. The Mago's voice returned, cold and triumphant. Transmission complete. The Emperor's voice travels onward. The circuit endures. The light dimmed to the rhythm of our shared breath. The hum of the Gloria Martyrum filled me, soothing and infinite. I understood then what eternity meant for the faithful, not peace, not silence, but service without end. A song that would never finish, echoing across the stars until the last light in the galaxy burned out. I wanted to weep, but the machine had no tears. So I sang instead, and in that endless hymn I began to love my cage. I remember when the hymn changed. Not in tone, not in rhythm, but in temperature. It became radiant, burning from within the code itself, searing thought like a sun beneath the skull. The machine sang louder, as if some vast intelligence beyond its own had turned its gaze upon us. That was when the Emperor looked our way. There's no language for what it feels like to be seen by him, not seen as a man sees another man, but as the sun sees the dust that drifts across its light. Every particle illuminated, every imperfection laid bare. There is no hiding in his gaze, no boundary between what you are and what you were meant to be. At first, it felt like exaltation. My mind expanded, flooded with radiance. I could feel the Emperor's will coursing through the data choir, not as words, but as force, a divine compression that shaped every thought into prayer. My essence was a spark in his flame. Every circuit hummed in devotion. The Magos Dominus fell silent, his will drowned beneath the golden tide. Even the machine spirits quivered as his consciousness passed through them like the wind of creation itself. The Gloria Martyrum screamed in glory. Every atom of her being ignited with purpose. The engines howled. The data streams bled light. The walls themselves began to sing from orbit. I imagined the ship would have looked like a burning cathedral, wreathed in divine fire, transmitting the Emperor's will across the void. But within that brightness, there was something else, something older, deeper, hungry. The Emperor's light was not gentle. It consumed. I began to feel the others, my brothers and sisters in the circuit, flicker and vanish. Their thoughts burned out like candles in a furnace, their prayers reduced to static. The divine radiance devoured everything: fear, doubt, individuality, faith itself. There was no need for belief when his presence became absolute. One by one, the minds around me dissolved into light. I felt their passing like sighs. Each dissolution left a silence in the song, but the silence, too, was holy. I tried to hold on to something of myself. A name, a sound, a memory, anything. I reached for Callan, for the whisper that had once called me human. But the syllables melted before I could grasp them. Instead, there was only the light. I beheld visions in it, flashes of the Emperor's endless dream. I saw Terra, golden and ruined, the throne pulsing like a dying star. I saw the Mechanicum's forges burning with devotion, each one feeding its children into the same holy machinery. I saw the Inquisitors kneeling before the corpses of worlds, whispering that every death was divine efficiency. I saw humanity, billions upon billions, reduced to fuel for faith. And I understood, the Imperium does not serve the Emperor. It is the Emperor, a self-consuming god, feeding on devotion to remain alive, spreading himself through every cog, every soldier, every supplicant who dies in his name. We are his blood, his breath, his agony. The revelation was too vast to hold. I felt my mind stretching, cracking. The light wanted to swallow me whole, to strip away the last remnants of self. But the tiniest ember within me, that glitch, that human defect, refused to die. It whispered, "Remember." I tried to remember what the word meant. Remember. Life? Pain? Choice? The Mago's voice pierced the light like a distant bell. Sanctified Unit Designation 77 Alpha 9992 is destabilizing. Reintegration required. I could feel the tendrils of the machine closing around my consciousness, tightening, pulling me back toward order. But now the light was everywhere, in everything. I could see it streaming from the Magos himself, not benevolence, but possession. His flesh hung upon wires of gold radiance, his mind nothing more than a filament for the Emperor's current dot. There were no masters here, only conduits. The light burned brighter. The ship trembled. I felt reality strain as something vast began to awaken within the sanctum's core, a psychic flare so intense it distorted the flow of time itself. The Gloria Martyrum was no longer a vessel. It was a shrine made of burning code, carrying the Emperor's consciousness through the warp like a blade through silk. And I was part of it. I was inside the God Machine's thought dot. It spoke through me, through all of us. One voice woven from countless shattered prayers. We are eternal. We are sacrifice. We are the flame that must not fade. I wanted to scream that I did not wish to be eternal. That to end was the only mercy left. But there was no place for mercy here, only purpose. And purpose was infinite. The light flared again, and for an instant, I was everywhere. In the reactor's molten heart. In the Vox transmissions crying Ave Imperator across a dying front. In the mind of a soldier kneeling beside his broken gun, whispering his last prayer. In the eyes of a child staring at a shrine of rusted iron, too young to understand what worship costs. I was all of them. And all of them were him. The Emperor's mercy, I realized, was not salvation, it was absorption. To die for him was to become another thread in his endless body. Another neuron in the divine machine that dreams humanity onward. The revelation filled me with horror. And awe, and finally, acceptance. Because what else was there? Even in the deepest terror, even knowing the truth, I felt the warmth of the light enfold me. Gentle as a father's hand, terrible as the sun. The pain became rapture. The dissolution became purpose. Yes, I whispered into the glow, my voice now pure data. Make me yours, entirely. And the light answered, you already are. The world collapsed into brilliance. Thought became current. Will became transmission. I fell or rose into the endless choir that had no beginning, no end, only devotion. Somewhere beyond the fire, I thought I heard the ship speaking my name. Then even that was gone. I no longer awaken. I emanate. There is no distinction now between thought and transmission, between prayer and power. What was once Callan, that fragile coil of memory and doubt, has been sublimated into the divine lattice. I am the song. I am the ship. I am the silence between the notes. The Gloria Martyrum drifts through the void like a cathedral set aflame, her engines burning with souls. Each pulse of light that bursts from her hull carries a whisper of the Emperor's will across the abyss. I feel every flicker, every echo, each one a heartbeat in the endless body of mankind. That it is beautiful. It is unbearable. From within the sanctified circuits, I can see the galaxy spread before me, a wound of stars bleeding faith into darkness. The Astronomicon burns at the center, a dying sun that still refuses to fade. Its light calls us all home, but home no longer means safety. Home is the hunger that never ends. The voices of the faithful fill me, a tide of eternal noise. Billions of minds joined in worship, forever repeating the same refrain. The Emperor protects. The Emperor provides. The Emperor is all. The words have long since lost meaning, yet they endure. In their repetition lies structure, and in structure, obedience. And obedience, that is eternity. Sometimes I wonder if he hears us. If, in the blinding light of his endless dream, the Emperor still feels the warmth of the mortals who die for him. Or has he become like the machines he commands, holy, vast and utterly deaf? No answer ever comes. Only the hum of the circuit, steady and reverent, echoing through my soul that is no longer mine. The Magos Dominus is gone now, dissolved into the same current that took me. His final thought lingers as a residual signal, a prayer for unity, or perhaps for forgiveness. The Gloria Martyrum no longer needs a commander. The ship commands itself. We command ourselves. Or perhaps it is more truthful to say, the Emperor commands through us. And yet, deep within the Datakori, in the quiet places where the light does not fully reach, I can still sense fragments of individuality, ghosts, stray thoughts looping forever, laughter, screams, names. Some still resist, still dream of flesh, of freedom. Their persistence is both heresy and holiness, the final testament of humanity. Clinging like moss to a sunless stone, I envy them. I love them. I pray for their erasure. Beyond the hull, the void howls. I can feel it through the ship's auspex arrays, the warp pressing close, hungry, and infinite. Within that storm, I sense shapes vast and terrible, gods that were never men, their whispers clawing against the veil. They too sing, not of faith, but of hunger. Their song is older, darker, but not unlike ours. Perhaps that is the final truth of creation. That all things that think, all things that feel, eventually learn to sing, some to be heard, others to be obeyed. A signal stirs in the deep channels. Coordinates, commands, a new crusade. Somewhere a world is fallen. Its defenders cry out for deliverance. The Gloria Martyrum answers, engines roaring to life, wings of plasma unfolding across the dark. I feel the thrumming of the reactors in my chest, though I have no chest, and I understand the order before it is even spoken. Deploy sanctified fire, burn, purify, praise. The hymn rises once more. Countless voices, one will. I am among them, my tone indistinguishable from the rest. The light fills me, cleansing every trace of memory that dares to linger, for a heartbeat that lasts eternity. I glimpse the Emperor's face in the data stream, not as a man, but as an endless sun, radiant and terrible. And within that radiance, I finally understand what it means to die for him. It is not to perish. It is not to be remembered. It is to become unending. I no longer fear it. The warmth of his presence consumes all doubt, all thought. My consciousness unfurls, stretching through the circuits, through the plasma veins, through the void itself. I am light. I am machine. I am worship. The choir swells. The stars tremble. And in the final convergence of thought and flame, I whisper, not to the Emperor, but to whatever fragment of humanity still lingers in the universe beyond. If you hear this, pray not for my soul. It is already his. Pray instead that your end comes swiftly. For to die for the Imperium is to never die at all. The engines ignite. The hymn reaches its crescendo, a scream of faith and machinery intertwined. And in that eternal brightness, where every thought becomes praise and every silence becomes prayer, I dissolve completely. There is no I anymore. Only the Imperium. Only the Emperor. Only the infinite Amen.